You know, when you think about ancient legal systems, you might picture something pretty rigid. But what if I told you one of the most famous is actually a brilliant detective story, packed with logic puzzles that are still fascinating thousands of years later? Today, we're diving into the Talmud to solve one of its classic cases, and it all kicks off with a really simple, everyday question.
So picture this. You're in the market, you see a chicken, it looks professionally done, but you didn't see who actually did the work. So is it kosher? Is it okay to eat? Now, you'd think the answer would be a simple yes or no, but that simple question is the first clue in a much bigger investigation.
All right, here's our game plan. We're going to start with a seemingly simple rule and watch it get complicated. Then we'll look at a powerful legal shortcut and see what happens when we put it to the test with some conflicting clues, all before we finally crack the case. Let's jump in.
So every great detective story starts with what looks like an open and shut case, right? You've got a clear rule that should just solve everything right away.
Okay, so the initial law is totally straightforward. If you witness the entire process, you know it's done right, you're good to go. If you miss any part of it, well, you can't be 100% sure, so the meat's off limits. Makes perfect sense. But what happens when we introduce just a little bit of doubt?
And there it is, our first real problem. You see the whole thing, but you have no clue if the person doing it is a trained professional or just some random person who's never done it before. Suddenly, that simple rule doesn't really help us. We're going to need a new tool to figure this out.
So to get past this roadblock, the Talmudic sages bring in this really powerful principle. You can think of it as a kind of ancient statistical reasoning. It's a legal shortcut for when you're dealing with the unknown.
This principle is called Rav, and it literally means majority. It's an incredibly practical tool that basically says, look, when you don't have all the facts, you can make a reasonable guess based on what's usually true. It's like playing the odds legally.
So, how do we apply this to our chicken problem? Well, the sages say, let's start with a default assumption. Most people who are performing this kind of slaughter are trained experts. It's a specialized skill. So, unless you have some evidence that says otherwise, you can just assume the person you saw was an expert. Boom, problem solved, right? Well, maybe not.
Now, this is what I find so cool about this whole process. The Talmud doesn't just introduce a rule and move on, it immediately starts stress testing it. It throws new scenarios at the rule to see where it holds up and where it might break.
Okay, so let's check out this comparison. On the left, you send someone, an agent, to slaughter your chicken. You come back, it's done, but you don't know for sure if your guy did it or if some stranger just happened to do it instead. Then, on the right, you have a really similar situation, but this time it's about separating agricultural tithes, which is an act that requires your personal intent.
And look at this, the outcomes are totally different. For the slaughtered chicken, it's still kosher. Why? Because that majority rule kicks in. Even if a stranger did it, we assume they were qualified. But for the tithe, the action is totally invalid. A random person can't just fulfill your personal religious duty for you. So here's the key distinction. The majority rule is about general, public expertise, not about personal agency.
Okay, so just when we think we've got a handle on how this Rav principle works, the Talmud hits us with a curveball. It brings up what looks like a direct contradiction from an even earlier source. It's a new clue that might just blow our whole case wide open.
So here's the new case. Someone's goats wander off, and later they find them slaughtered. Can they eat the meat? Well, we have two rabbis with two totally different answers. Rabbi Hanina says yes, which lines up perfectly with our majority, our experts rule. But Rabbi Yehuda says no, which seems to just completely throw that rule out the window. So what's going on? Who's right? Is our main principle totally wrong?
This is where the detective work gets really, really good. A new sage steps into the debate and basically says, hey everyone, you're all looking at the wrong clue. He says the mystery isn't about who did the slaughtering, it's about the physical evidence, the crime scene itself.
A later rabbi, known as Rebbe, comes along and just brilliantly reframes the entire argument. He says Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Hanina were never actually disagreeing about the majority rule. Their whole argument was about the meaning of where the slaughtered animals were discovered. The context, he says, changes everything.
Okay, so just watch how the argument gets more and more focused. What started out as this huge fight over a major legal principle gets narrowed down by Rebbe. He says, look, if it's found in a scrap heap, that suggests it was thrown away. If it's found in a house, it was probably kept. Then another sage comes in and refines it even more, saying everyone actually agrees on those obvious cases. The only place they really disagree is in that ambiguous middle ground, a private trash pile inside a house.
But this laser focus leads to an even deeper puzzle.
When you analyze Rebbe's statement closely, it looks like he sides with Rabbi Yehuda about the scrap heap in the house, but he also seems to side with Rabbi Hanina in the exact same situation. It looks like a flat-out contradiction. How can he possibly agree with two opposite positions on the very same point?
So we've hit the final twist in our investigation. It looks like an impossible knot. But if you read the text just one more time, very carefully, the solution is right there. And it's not a contradiction at all. It's actually a masterclass in finding common ground.
And there it is. This is the final twist, and it's brilliant. See, Rebbe isn't stating his own opinion. He's explaining the limits of the original fight by showing the exact scenarios where these two opposing rabbis would actually have to agree with each other. He's not picking a side, he's mapping out the area of consensus.
So let's just break that down. The big resolution is that Rebbe is saying, of course, Rabbi Hanina would agree with Rabbi Yehuda that meat found in a public dump is forbidden. And on the flip side, of course, Rabbi Yehuda would agree with Rabbi Hanina that meat found properly stored in a house is permitted. Which means that our main principle, the whole majority of slaughters or experts idea, was never actually the thing they were arguing about. The entire complicated debate was just to figure out the boundaries and to show that the real disagreement was only ever about that tiny slice of ambiguous evidence in the middle.
And that brings us all the way back to the beginning. This whole ancient legal detective story, it isn't just about chickens and goats. It's this incredibly deep exploration of logic, of evidence, and of assumption. And it leaves us with a really critical question for our own lives. When we don't have all the facts, when is relying on what's usually true a smart shortcut? And when is it a dangerous assumption that blinds us to what's really going on?